everyone, and welcome to the start of the afternoon session. My name is Tolu Disu. I am the Business Development Director at CrossBoundary Energy. We are a company that develops, owns, installs, and operates hybrid powered solutions for commercial and industrial companies. And I am proud to be the moderator for the session today, which is looking at mining and the energy transition. So we will be discussing how our fellow stakeholders, the panelists, will be able to develop a more sustainable industry within the mining industry. And I will allow them to take 45 seconds to introduce themselves.
Thank you. And I'll start then. Thanks for the opportunity to be here as well. My name is Roberto Berardo from Release by Scatec. We're also an independent power producer, focusing on renewable energy solutions for mining companies. And yeah, my responsibility is primarily to origination of projects for mines.
Erez Ichilov, based in New York, and for the past 11 years, heading the as a managing director, heading the investment projects for the Traxys group, which is an international physical commodities house. And our strategy is to basically be the commercial partner to these projects and to help them come to fruition. I'm also on the board of Scatec, which is a implementation project company on the TSX for anything that can make mining more green and more efficient. And recently also joined the board of Luna Lithium, which is exploring for spodumene in Brazil and Paraguay.
Thank you, and thank you for being here. Jonathan Guy, I'm a equity analyst with Hannam Partners. We're a UK-based specialist natural resources investment bank boutique. I personally tend to specialize in gold and other precious metal equities.
Hi everyone, my name is Philippe Olivier. I represent the IFC, International Finance Corporation. So it's the private arm of the World Bank Group, part of the mining team there. So we invest in various forms across the spectrum, from project finance, debt, corporate finance, to equity, into mining projects, various stages of development and operations. And happy to be here.
Hi, I'm David Smith. I'm from Canada. I guess I'm the producer representative on this panel. I'm the chairman of Canada Nickel. We're going to be developing what I think will turn into the largest nickel reserves in the world. And I retired from Agnico Eagle, one of the largest gold mining companies in the world, last year, after 19 years there. So I certainly have some experience talking about the sustainability at the site level.
All right, thanks. So let's kickstart. I think I will direct this question for Erez to start. And it's, what does decarbonization in the mining industry look like? And how can both the juniors and the majors look to make their projects more sustainable?
So the observation I think that we're making is actually very visual, because energy transition really pushed mining and is pushing mining to its next evolutionary stage in a bit of a revolutionary fashion even. If we used to think about sort of nodes in a web, and the supply chain is the web, but the node was pretty much standalone, then came vertical integration or backwards integration, depending sort of where you start, but it's still in the second dimension. And now what we're seeing, that as energy transition comes and decarbonizing of existing supply chains, existing ways of doing things, but also the new things coming on board, there's typically a need for a symbiotic power generation solution, ideally a renewable one, as another dimension of the project. We're seeing carbon capture, carbon sequestration, and even carbon accreditation as an integral part. And it's not just backfilling, it's also where your resource sort of ends, potentially a porous type of sand or other mineral could be there, which could be then used for carbon sequestration. You take a surface, you can do carbon capture. Part of the tailing solutions also involve that. And of course, taking into account already rolling to scope 3, on the GHG, etc. The processing is also looking to add sorting, so you crush less, to concentrate more, so you move less weight, etc., etc. So it becomes sort of multidimensional. And then what really takes it to 4D is the time dimension, because what we're seeing now is that rehabilitation and closure is not just an afterthought, very nicely stacked, hopefully without accidents, tailings or dumps or ponds or whatever, but we're seeing that the initial mining plan is already aiming to leave an area that's fit for purpose for the next purpose. So from a time perspective, we're also bringing into the present the next use of that land, which is also very important. And this, I think, will connect to something that you'll probably talk about later, which has to do with sort of trust issues between our sector and the general public and how to bridge these gaps. So what we're seeing is basically a 4-dimensional project as opposed to a node sitting somewhere in a grid. And that's very meaningful, and that makes a huge difference. And it brings into the economics projects beyond just competing for grade or for size or for distance from the port, but how does the whole thing look like, and how does it all connect? And that's very important. And in the United States, the Department of Energy, part of the ARPA programs, one of them, the ARPA Miner, is now basically providing small grants, $1 million or $2 million, to everyone who's either digging a deep hole in the ground or wants to dig one, to also explore and try to see if there's a carbon sequestration and carbon capture solution. And it's true about a lot of the other kind of inefficiencies of the various traditional processes. So I guess as an observation taken a step backwards, we moved from a node to vertical integration to sort of multi-dimensional projects. And that's where mining and the energy transition all connect.
Oh, thanks. I think it's maybe I can latch on some of those points, at least from a power generation perspective. Well, I think first, this title of the panel, there was also a word that you talked about decarbonization, but there's also about sustainability, right?
Course,
And
yes.
sustainable, how we make mining more sustainable. And I think the perception, at least that we had on our side of the table of being, again, more of focusing on renewable energy solutions for mines is that, sustainability came kind of as transition from something that has been kind of pushed from shareholders and sort of the ESG and the climate change lens to something that there's the realization of the mining sector that sustainable actually means more efficient. So the equation kind of went from sustainable, it is actually more efficient in terms of not going and hunting for, resource which is kind of more polluting like fossil fuel, but more like on the renewable energy side, something that it's, of course, more electron-based, more efficient from a power generation perspective, but also on the fact that mines is more and more, and maybe Canada Nickel can comment on that, more electric, right? Like, what does it mean about electrifying everything? It's basically renewables will have to play a bigger role in the mining industry going forward. And I think it's an underlying and a bit of a base conversation that, I would say a handful of years ago, we will be talking more about, okay, does actually renewable work? Does it integrate with the existing power infrastructure? And now it's more like, okay, renewables, we have to do it. How? It's more the question of how is this going to be part of the ecosystem of mines in general. So that's a bit on the sustainability element, but I think you touched on other points about the multidimensional part of the infrastructure projects of mines. And I think one of the things that we're trying to do, especially service provider, and in our case, our company as well, we're trying to do breaking a bit the barriers for mining companies, for the ability of mining companies to adapt renewable energy at any phase of the mine of life. And that's a pretty different or kind of unique value proposition in a way. So we're trying, I think, and this is also where I think the next step is in terms of the adoption of renewables, is the fact that so far most of the mines thinks about renewables as something that can be coming online when the mine is fully operational, and provided that there is a long-term view and span in front of the mine in terms of whether it's life of mine or country risk, whatever the geopolitics. What we're trying to do is to make all of these a lot more flexible and fluid by encouraging mining to look at renewable solutions at any phase, whether it's construction phase, whether it's the tail end of the life of mine, or during, of course, during the sort of when the mine is fully operational, basically. So what we're trying to say is that there are solutions out there, and there are possibilities to actually adopt more sustainable and decarbonizing solution in the power generation without having to invest capital, taking lots of risk, and without having necessarily 20 years life of mine in front of the asset. So that's kind of the underlying message.
Dave? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, maybe I could. I like a couple of points which both Erez and Roberto made. The first one, Erez, about the concept of web, and I think it's very much that. And just taking a step back from, when we mean decarbonization, we first think about power and renewable power as the first kind of critical step in decarbonizing the mine. But what we mean by decarbonization is climate mitigation. So it's the climate angle which we're looking to tackle in the projects that we invest in. And the climate angle has two sides. You have the mitigation, you have the adaptation. And the decarbonization is only one of those angles. It's the mitigation, right? And as a multilateral development institution, IFC, we do claim a certain leadership in sustainability. To be challenged or not, I'm happy to answer questions there. But we're signatory, and we've committed as per the Paris Agreement, to curb the emissions and the temperature rise to below 2 degrees or optimum 1.5 degrees. So we're committed to be 100% Paris aligned starting in 2023 in all the projects that we take. And that means that any project that investors such as IFC and all the signatories to Paris alignment have to be Paris aligned, so be aligned with the commitments from the countries in which the mining operations operate to decarbonize and provide climate adaptation solutions, so be resilient through the cycle as a project, but also provide resilience to the environment and the communities around the project. And that's where I think the web concept is interesting, because you're kind of closing the loop, and you were touching on carbon capture. We are looking at projects where we're trying to leverage nature solutions to capture carbon on the side of mining operations, developing carbon markets, etc. But when you look at, just quoting an example, we look at nature solutions, reforestation. Reforestation means interactions with the communities which by tradition come and cut trees to burn for cooking, for fueling, etc. So this climate decarbonization project that started from the mining operation is evolving to a major community social program, which it's a very holistic approach to it. And I think these are all elements which we need to take into account, and which are becoming more and more expected from the investor's point of view when we're looking into a project, at least for now from IFC's perspective. But I'm pretty sure that the rest of the investor world will follow soon enough. And maybe you're a good transition to that.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point. If you look at the way that this has changed over the last 20 years, ESG has very much come to the fore, and decarbonisation is part of that, but it's only part of that. You've got to look at the broader environmental, carbon intensity, carbon emissions. You've got to look at relations with local communities, water usage, the amount of water that's being recycled, and you've got to look at union relations, how much is going into social program. It's got to be part of a much broader program, because I think we all remember back to the 1990s when people would have programs and they say, well, we built a hospital, but what they actually meant is we built a building with no staff and we're not going to pay for that, or we built a school but there are no teachers and there are no blackboards. And the industry, I think, has come so far from that to this point, and now the technology is catching up. So in terms of decarbonisation, there will be easy things to decarbonise, and I think, putting in solar, putting in wind, putting in hydro where appropriate to power plants is perhaps the easier part of the equation. The harder thing will perhaps be big yellow pieces of kit and surface fleet. But the industry is in a very different place from where it was 20 years ago. And I think if you look at what investors want, many investors, and not just sort of people like the IFC, but big institutions, will not look at projects, will not look at companies if they don't meet those ESG criteria.
Yeah, I think it's well understood by mining companies that they have responsibility, and I've literally been in mining my whole life, and I've seen it become more and more important. But I think proudly, most companies have always been quite responsible. I think we're doing a much better job of reporting these days. We do need help from investors because none of these efforts are free. And by help, I mean the investors actually have to understand that there's a cost associated with this. So just supporting the lowest cost company is probably not sending the right message. They have to acknowledge that first class practices probably cost first class money. And I think that's coming along as well. I think the investors are largely getting there. And of course, there are some funds that will only invest if you tick every single ESG box. And that's great. Where I think the industry needs a lot more support is from governments and governmental organizations, because a lot of mines are infrastructure challenged. They're literally in the middle of nowhere. And I know this firsthand because during my career at Agnico, we built 3 mines in the Canadian Arctic. Zero infrastructure, literally zero. And as a result, every piece of electricity comes from diesel generation. There is no other option. Now, you'd love to build wind farms, and in fact, they're talking about doing so, but do the wind farms really work well when it's 70 below zero? And so there's always these specific challenges to specific sites. On a personal basis, I think the future of remote mining probably needs nuclear, to be honest. That would be the cleanest and best and simplest, most economic solution. But there are some other interesting angles. For example, to bring it back to Canada Nickel, by miracle of molecular chemistry and metallurgy, our tailings will in fact suck up carbon dioxide just automatically, just by leaving it there. What we've done is done a lot of test work on injecting CO2 into the tailings pipeline and actually accelerating that permanent carbon capture, therefore removal process. And I think it's that type of thinking that's a little bit outside the box that will help the entire industry when the mineralogy will do so. Not every case, but a lot of nickel sulfide deposits will in fact suck up CO2. But the governments may have to step in and help support a lot of these efforts to say, yes, we want to get there. In my personal experience, the investors have not been that supportive to date.
All right.
Of the additional cost, I mean.
Understandable. Thank you, guys. I will move on to the public perception and the reputation of the mining industry. And how is this actually important? And are we seeing a positive shift? And in light of the public awareness of decarbonization or decarbonizing the mining industry, how does this change the value proposition for the mining industry? And what does it mean for investment? I think I can push it back to Dave to start as well.
Yeah, I guess I was just talking about that. I literally had a conversation with one of our largest shareholders in my Agnico days, and I said, how much do you think ESG costs us? And he said, I don't know, like $5 an ounce. I said, in fact, we just did a back of the envelope exercise and it was more like $50 per ounce. But we actually have a long way to go. So would you still support our company and be a happy shareholder if our costs went up $100 per ounce because we were doing the right thing? And I'll never forget, he said, oh, I don't know, $100 an ounce. Like, I don't know about that. And I said, well, none of this stuff is free. Everyone wants to get to the same place. I think it's going to be a long process to get there. If some countries or mining sites don't have the same environmental regulations or standards, then perhaps operating in those regions is a lot less expensive. Does that attract the investment where the Canadian Arctic does not? So far, my experience is such. But I think it's actually going the right direction where you also have to do the right thing or you will not get the investment dollar. But I think it's going to take quite a while yet, to be honest. And that also applies to permitting as well. I think there are regions of the world where the permitting process is a lot less stringent and rigid than the regions that Agnico, for example, would be prepared to operate in. So I'd like a more balanced playing field for everyone, and I think the investors can drive that.
That makes sense. Have any?
Yeah, no, just to add to that, I think that there are, let's call it, trust issues between our industry and the general public, and some sort of bad news is always makes the headline more than just routine good work. But it's still, I think memining is probably safer than driving a bus or working in construction, and even in the Western world. It's I think what we probably need to do is have some visible redemption, rehabilitation. People have to see with their own eyes that actually there's some sort of a cleanup, and I think that's where tech can save the day, because it brings in into the economics tailings and all kinds of dumps and leftovers from the past. So it's not just a cost, but there's also some offset, and some of them are even profitable in their own right. So that's potentially something. But this lack of these, let's call it, trust issues, have some important effects, because I think that a lot of the younger folks, as they kind of take their decision about their career paths, perhaps they find AI or anything tech, etc., more attractive than the schools of mining. So it's sort of a bit of a competition, I think, for talent. And another thing is on permitting and on a social license. One of the reasons, not the only one, that permitting and EIAs are so slow has to do with trust. Why do you need very long baselines sometimes for stuff that's pretty obvious? Because the assumption is that maybe you're kind of taking some shortcuts, and maybe that's again where trust is sort of an issue. So that's hampering and slowing down, I think, permitting, and there's more objections and more appeals to the appeals and so on, which are not necessarily with much merit. And I think the industry is actually pretty good at planning and designing and getting the right environmental studies these days. So it's part of it's part of, I guess, two things. One is, in a way, we all sort of have to practice some sort of a kaizen, a constant improvement on all aspects of what we're doing. And part of it has to do perhaps with advocating, with actually promoting our cause, which hasn't really been done. There's no real kind of a miners' union that keeps promoting agenda and so on. And I mean in a good way, not in a populistic way, which is also something that's a problem. And, we're all in the mining sector for decades, and we think that this is the whole world. But actually, the aggregate sector is probably smaller than any one of the really big major tech companies, if you think about aggregate market cap. So it's a relatively, for us, it's the whole world, but it's relatively small from the sort of the bigger perspective, and its importance and how critical it is really for the future of this planet and the human race is, I think, not fully understood. It's just, it is what it is. There's nothing greener than a sustainable, responsible mining project, delivering the materials that are necessary for fighting climate change, for energy transition, for anything in our life, and that's to some extent overlooked and misunderstood, and we have to, do this Sisyphean work of promoting, educating, explaining, and hopefully we'll get there.
You're absolutely right. And I think that's been a persistent problem for the industry for years and years. And the public do need to understand that if on the one hand you don't want to be burning fossil fuels, then the only alternative is electrification if you want to maintain anything like the lifestyle that you're used to. And part of that is batteries, and part of that is mining copper, it's mining cobalt, it's mining lithium, it's mining all the things that go into maintaining modern life. And the industry has been very poor at presenting its case for how that can be done, and how that can be done in a way that is environmentally friendly and ultimately carbon neutral as well. The industry has allowed itself to be painted into a corner where people talk about mining and they they typically think of artisanal mining in the Congo. They don't think of big industrial mining, and it's that's certainly one of the major challenges I think the industry faces globally, particularly in countries which no longer have major mining industries, or where mining is a small component of the overall economy.
Yeah. Just a quick insert before going to you, Philippe, that you mentioned maintaining the lifestyles, and that's perhaps another angle where there's, where we could help. Another trust issue, I think, is that we'll also need to actually change our habits as Earthlings on this planet. We may need to be a little bit modest in some of our in some of our consumption, and some of have perhaps more customized solutions as far as construction, infrastructure, etc. Mobility will probably, at least in densely populated area, have to be shared and communal. And perhaps we don't need 2-3 cars per individual working for whatever 10% of their life. Think about the aviation industry. An airplane is in the air 23 hours out of 24, and for 50 years, and we're not that efficient. So maybe less hardware per capita is also part of that. So it's a combination of maybe a meatless Monday and so on and so forth. It's not just, there are several dimensions to that, which perhaps also have to do with some change in our habits. But it's everything. Again, it's multidimensional, and that's the only way to do it. And I think we're not getting enough understanding and enough attention, and the onus of proof is on us at the end of the day.
What I wanted to go back was to Dave's point about increasing costs. How far do you go in the ESG commitment, and how does that result in your operating cost base and the return on your shareholder in the end? And I think there is some truth to that, but it has to be balanced. I think the public perception comes down to the social license to operate. And I mean, we've recently seen the case of Panama, right, where it's a binary result. It's not a lower return on capital issue. It's zero return on capital versus an actual project that works. I'm not saying it's purely ESG driven, but surely that was part of it. And from that point of view, I mean, this opinion is mine. It's not that of my institution. Disclaimer. But maybe the reflection that needs to be had is one about cleanup of the portfolio of mining operations that we have, and I'm just putting the idea out there that some mining operations are in environments or in locations where it doesn't make sense from an ESG perspective to keep on operating them, because there's just no technological solutions to do so. And therefore, there's no way to get the social license to develop that project. Maybe that's a reflection that needs to be had. It's not just going after the return on the shareholders, but also going after I'm not going to say moralistic, but a reasonable project pipeline in terms of ESG impact. And to come back to your point, Erez, on the consumer side, right? And I see this as a push and pull kind of situation. So, from my point of view, I mean, and I fully agree. I mean, I'm all for moderating a bit our consumption way of life, adapting, etc., consuming less metal, less energy, so that the metals that we produce actually go towards the energy transition and not add on to the volumes that we need currently for our daily lives, and so as to ensure the proper supply to meet the energy transition. What I'm saying maybe is we need to bear the cost as well of requiring higher ESG standards from the sourcing of our minerals, and that means that the price to pay at the bottom line at the finished product will increase, and therefore will economically so have to consume less, because we will not be able to afford those higher quality ESG standards products that we are consuming. So it's a bit of from my point of view, a pull and push on the consumer side, require these higher ESG standards with a lot of constraints and challenges in doing so. But from the sourcing of the minerals, and on the sourcing of the minerals, being able to push higher standards and move those standards forward on the decarbonization, on the biodiversity, on the social aspects as well, push all those standards forward so that the entire market moves and preserves the margin and the returns in the end of those that take the risk of extracting those minerals.
But I think we have to bear in mind that there are 6 billion individuals on this planet who don't enjoy anything like the energy resources that we currently do, and don't have anything like the lifestyle that we do, and they want to use more energy, and they want to have fresh water and nice clothes and good education, access to electronics, and all the things that we have. And so, yes, we may need to use somewhat less in the West, but there's a lot of people who want and frankly deserve more. So we have to work out how to enable them to have a better lifestyle, and the lifestyle that everyone in the West aspires to, without limiting their growth, because that they have that right as well.
Yeah, I fully agree. But then the question is, what kind of growth are we promoting there? And maybe we're
people have their own agency and they can promote their own growth.
And again, that's my own opinion. But then there's the development model that we're pushing forward. And do we want them to catch up with what the West has been doing, and which is putting us in this critical situation today where we have to transition in energy systems within a very short time frame, or do we want to promote something else which would achieve same human development standards but differently? Then maybe, I don't know, we can...
Yeah, I think we're drifting off topic.
But on that, to bring it back a little bit, I think in the next several years, we're actually going to witness something, to your point, in the nickel business, because Indonesia is dominating nickel supply at the moment, but it is unbelievably highly carbon intensive. I keep getting asked all the time whether I think there will actually be two prices for nickel going forward. There'll be, let's call it dirty nickel, high carbon nickel, maybe more politically correct, high carbon nickel, and then there'll be low carbon nickel like Canada Nickel's going to produce through the magic of we will actually be producing carbon credits, in fact, through the mining operation. But will people actually pay a different price for Canada Nickel's nickel, or will there be a discount for the Indonesian nickel? I don't actually know the answer yet, but I'm absolutely fascinated to watch it, because the way the system should work is, in fact, there should be a premium or a discount, whichever, or maybe both, because we should want to advance society in a more clean way.
Or at least the high carbon nickel shouldn't be competitive price-wise compared to the lower carbon nickel.
Sure, but as of today, that is not the case.
But if you're a battery maker, if it's up to governments through taxes and tariffs, then it's up to battery makers today to their suppliers. Well, this is what we require.
Yeah,
and transparency throughout supply chains.
Yeah, absolutely, and I really hope it continues to develop that way, and it is. I think the whole world is going the right direction on this. To your point, Samsung has just invested in Canada Nickel. Samsung's in Korea. They're actually pretty close to Indonesia. They could theoretically go and just get their nickel there, but they're choosing to go to Canada for the more green solution.
Segueing into the last question for the last 10 minutes, this is looking at the barriers that the continent has overall with adopting sustainable ways of working and how one can do that. It's also looking at what is the possibility that African nations can actually adopt the framework for the Sustainable Development Goals. I think I'm going to direct that to you, Philippe.
So it's, for the record, it's a loaded question.
It is.
So first of all, I mean, the first part of the question is around the constraints that we see in the development of a sustainable mining industry. I guess in Africa is a case in point. And I think we touched upon it in various forms and during the discussion. One is infrastructure. I mean, infrastructure, and by that I mean pretty simplistically, transport infrastructure, energy infrastructure, water infrastructure. And if you look at it, I mean, currently, I mean, we saw the first rail shipment coming out of Kamoa to Lobito by rail, and as an alternative to trucking all the way down to Durban or to Dar es Salaam. I mean, these major operations and the kind of volumes that we're looking at in terms of increase of volumes that we're looking at in the copper belt, for example, are incompatible with this up to now, and complete lack of extra infrastructure for transport, and all the more so very high carbon intensive transport modules. So how do we enable these infrastructure which are more climate conscious to be developed, to be expanded in terms of capacity when they exist, to be extended, to reach the mining operations, and therefore to put in place a business model, an economical model which makes sense. I mean, talking decarbonization, but also socially, security. I mean, all the issues that we know at the border along the routes of those exports. That's for the transport. For the energy, I mean, if the only alternative is HA for diesel generators, I mean, how are you going to decarbonize your operation if you don't have and maybe that's one for you. I'm happy for you to take that one.
No, maybe just while you brought the focus into the continent, right, in Africa, and I think just to add some perspectives here in terms of what has been done. It's not the public perception, but it's actually numbers. Like if you look at the renewables last year, I mean, worldwide there's been something like 395 gigawatts of added renewables. Africa, I think it's about 4.5 or 5 gigawatt of it, and it's staggering how little, of course, the continent has done. I'm not pointing fingers. I mean, we are, of course, part of the companies that is trying to accelerate that implementation. But I think when it comes to, again, the link to mines, there's a fair maybe connection in terms of, both companies like ourselves, solutions providers and mining working together, because of one of the points that's been touched about the policies and what are the obstacles to make those projects in power generation infrastructure reality. And what we see is that, of course, there's a number of countries where this is still sort of a bottleneck, right? So, and it's both entering, I think, underpinning a bit the how the mining industry is able to decarbonize itself, but also how those solutions are brought to mines, right? So I think there's a lot to be done there, and I think the industries can work together to make this reality for sure.
Just to add to that from a slightly different angle, one of the one of our narratives now is sort of tech will save the day. We're seeing so much creativity and so many smart people now focusing on the various inefficiencies and how to consume less water, consume less sulfur, crush less through sorting, move less by higher concentration, and so on. And actually, I think maybe Africa, because it's generally speaking a friendly mining environment, and there is a more a social license. There is a need for a social license, but the awareness actually of the importance of mining and extraction for the GDP and for growth, there is an awareness here. There are infrastructure barriers, but I think there's actually an opportunity in a way similar to like in Africa never really had landlines because it skipped directly to mobile, and to some extent, maybe Africa can skip directly to sort of the new age of responsible, decarbonized, tech-oriented type of mining and processing, and take sort of a leap forward. And I think from that perspective, there's actually reason for optimism, because this could actually be the continent where, from inception, you'll do things much better and avoid some of the mistakes that were done in other places. So I'd like to sort of see the half full part of the cup. And yes, of course, we have projects here. We know the issues, whether it's with power and transmission and with with transportation, etc. But there's a lot of opportunity as well. There's a lot of openness. There's a lot of creativity, and I actually think that a lot of these new ways of doing things could be implemented here. And that's the half full part of the glass, I think.
But always remember, the mining industry is actually full of very able engineers who are very innovative people who will look for solutions. And if I think at some of the mines I visited over the last few years, so I was up at Sukari mine, which is owned by Centamin in Egypt last year. When they started and built that mine in 2009, they were using refurbished diesel generators from Turkey. And last year they put in 36 megawatts of solar power with battery backup, and that provides for a big chunk of their power needs. And they've done that because it's economic to do so. If you think about the Kibali mine, which is owned by Barrick and AngloGold in the northeastern DRC, I mean, they're very remote, very poor road infrastructure. So it's hard getting energy, hard getting fuel in and out. So what they did there was a whole series of quite innovative run-of-river hydroelectric stations. And so it's about finding what works in an individual case, but having able engineers who can identify that. I don't know what you do in the high Arctic, but that's perhaps a discussion for another day. But certainly, the natural resources Africa has means that you do have the ability to have these remote generation, hybrid and other power solutions for mines.
Part of the question was around the SDGs and the enabling environment, and I think the SDGs is a good closing concept on how we started with the web image, because the SDGs, all 17 of them, one way or another, the mining industry impacts them directly or indirectly, and it's not single one of them that's completely left out by the mining industry. And I think it's telling of the way that we need to look at sustainability in mining in a holistic way. Environment, decarbonization is kind of the first thing that pops into mind. We're looking to limit the net impact on the environment. Well, maybe now it's time to move on to positive impact. You're talking about carbon capture from your project. These are the kind of solutions which we should bring forward and which we should publicize as well. So that's the whole public understands as well what's really at work within the industry, trying to find the solutions to the challenge that we're facing collectively, right? If we're looking, we're touching on the evolution of standards. Again, we think sustainability, environment, well, it's not just environment. Environment is biodiversity as well. How do we impact biodiversity? How do we offset the impact? How do we minimize the impact? How do we offset the impact that we have? It's about social as well. How do we go beyond? How do we make sure that once the mine, this is a fossil operation. At some point, the mine will have to close. What happens after the mine is closed? How do we ensure that we've developed socially sufficiently the community, that they sustain economically, and they can remain in the area where they've grown, lived, gone old, and benefited from the operation, from the wealth that's been created from the mineral which was sitting under the feet.
I just want to sneak in one sentence before you continue on SDGs. A very smart economist, Dr. Hamid Rashid from the UN. He's a chief macroeconomist based in New York and also lectures at Columbia. And he's actually working these days to add responsible mining as a UN SDG. So I think that's an initiative we should all support.
All right, fellas, I will give you an opportunity to give us some closing remarks on this whole panel. Start with you.
Shall I start? Yeah. Well, I think definitely feeling positive about there's a lot of focus, and I think this is, of course, not going anywhere anytime soon. So I think in general, we're moving in the right direction. I think in general, it's more about how we make this maybe a more steady or accelerate the growth when it comes to, again, the decarbonization and electrification of mines. So positive about it.
Yeah. I have a friend who always teases me that these conferences are like a support group. We're all sort of, within our, exactly, we're optimists. We believe in what we're doing, and, and we really think it will end well, but I really think it will. And I think Africa, the fact that to some extent it's geographically neutral, and even if the world is bifurcated, this may actually be the common axis connecting the sort of APAC and the Pan-Atlantic. Kind of going north to south is a good message, So having everyone here and seeing all these companies and all these investors and all the public and private sector and see this kind of internal combustion and optimism at the end of the day is, I think, what's going to enable us to take things forward.
I think I'd probably focus on more of a sort of micro thing more than a macro thing, and that's every year companies are now putting out their ESG reports, and generally they're improving in quality year on year, but there's still too much waffle and too little data. And I think what we need to get people on, the public particularly, on board with the mining industry and the progress that's being made is focus much more on, look at how much carbon intensity on a year basis and those type of hard metrics rather than sort of more floral language. And that's perhaps one way forward for the industry.
Part of the questions that we were discussing before this panel was around what is the responsibility of the international community in helping the mining industry in the African countries develop this sustainable mining industry. And our being here and our sheer mandate, I'm speaking for my own institution, is to be enablers of this sustainable mining and enhance the impact, the development impact to those operations. So my closing message is there is a breadth of expertise, there is capital, there is a sheer willingness to have an impact. To the mining industry is use us. I mean, reach out, use this expertise and this willingness that there is across the board, I feel, to help and to contribute together to a more sustainable mining industry. It's not free of cost, but it's not too expensive either.
I'm just latching on to something that Jonathan said. There are a lot of good people doing a lot of good things in this industry. I've been in it my entire career, my entire life, in fact, because my dad was a mining engineer as well. I've always been incredibly proud of what the mining industry has done, and it is a primary industry. It has literally created wealth and helped grow the quality of life for the whole world. And so I'm very proud, and I think we're all still going in a great direction here, led by a lot of really smart people doing smart things.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.